And what do you expect to hear further down the line today?
Yeah, good morning, guys. This is the latest step in FIFA's attempted consultation to win support for these plans for biennial World Cups. Yesterday, I was talking to the from American World Cup winning coach Jill Ellis. She's been hired on the women's side of the game to try to consult there. Those plans are less advanced. On the men's side of the game, FIFA really stepping up the pace. The fact that they've got these meetings today and again on Thursday with the men's national team coaches, and we've seen criticism of these plans already across Europe. Didier Deschamps saying that it would trivialise the World Cup, holding it every 2 years. And we heard Gareth Southgate at the start of September saying he was a bit open-minded then more recent weeks, thinking actually, having heard more, the plans keep on changing, doesn't see they make sense, particularly over the change, the reconfiguration of the international calendar. And Gareth Southgate won't be taking part in these calls with Arsene Wenger, who is, of course, now the FIFA chief of global football development. And instead, the FA believe it's a matter for Mark Bullingham as CEO to consult on before they really come to a wider corporate view.
Seems strange, doesn't it, that Southgate doesn't want to play ball in this, but Bullingham might.
Yeah, and Bullingham's going to be taking part in their FIFA calls as well. I think Gareth Southgate's obviously already heard the plans over a month ago from from Arsene Wenger, so he already knows what is being envisaged. And the core component of these plans from Wenger are not only holding the World Cup every 2 years, but potentially a continental championship in the alternate years as well. So every summer, some form of tournament in June and July. And one of the most contentious things is reducing those international windows from the 5 currently to just potentially the 2, the one in the summer for the tournaments, and then October, November, a single big month-long block, rather than players going off for their countries in September, October, and November, and of course again in March. And this is a particular area of contention for Gareth Southgate because, he's pointing out, what about players not actually making those squads in October, November? And, I've heard it, speaking around the game, some smaller federations in particular saying that actually, if you only have your games in October, November, your cash flow is very much centered on that period. And also you're trying to attract fans just for the games rather than being spread out across the year as well. And also the fact a player could get injured, or multiple players, important players for teams, could get injured in that October, November period when the qualifiers will be played. And that could really jeopardize a team's chance of making a tournament.
So, Rob, basically, Simon's going to come in on this in a second, but is there anything to stop FIFA taking this to a vote and virtually railroading it through, and Wenger gets his way?
That's exactly the word used by UEFA a few weeks ago, railroaded. They think that FIFA are trying to railroad through these plans. Gianni Infantino is on a global tour at the moment. Yesterday, he was in Argentina. He was in the Middle East last week, and he's really trying to build up support from around the world. UEFA leading the opposition, along with Common Ball as well. But if FIFA was to put this to a vote of its members, 211, they'd very much be sure it seems of a majority. They already got 160 odd backing the consultation process. And something I asked Jill Ellis yesterday is whether or not the vote should be separated, a separate vote on a men's World Cup every 2 years and a women's World Cup every 2 years, because a lot of the countries, maybe only 3/4 actually have women's teams anyway. So they'd be voting for something that wouldn't even impact them. And perhaps they'd gain financial benefits from more frequent women's World Cups. But as it does seem now, Gianni Infantino is pushing ahead with it. Could there be some sort of compromise? There is talk around maybe this is all about pushing it to the extreme. But actually, in the end, maybe there isn't a World Cup every 2 years. But we come back to this plan discussed a few years ago of a global Nations League. So that still would ensure more games between the elite nations more often, more competitive games, and perhaps wouldn't seem as bad, and it wouldn't dilute the value of the World Cup. Of course, what sort of value would these games have? And of course, Arsene Wenger says it's all about trying to create more meaningful matches rather than the qualifiers at the moment, which can be pretty routine. We've got England, the Lionesses playing Women's World Cup qualifiers as well this week. We'd think that they're strongly placed to make the finals in 2023 in Australia and New Zealand. Interestingly, when we talk about the FA, well, Gareth Southgate has now started to be critical. Mark Bullingham is yet to give an FA position. From the women's side of the FA, the WSL division, they are against these plans because they believe there'd be an impact on the WSL. Other European women's leagues have said that. I interviewed England's new women's national team manager, Serena Wiegman, a month ago, and she was opposed to a World Cup every 2 years as well. Of course, she reached the final with the Netherlands in 2019. She believes that there's an impact on player welfare. It's already congested enough the calendar.
Well, I mean, you have to wonder, Simon's anybody for this. You get Infantino in the Middle East, now he's in Argentina, drumming up support. Yeah. Wenger's banging the drum, but who wants it?
Well, and as Rob has alluded to, you hear people that are managing World Cup winning countries, that have been World Cup winners as players, like Didier Deschamps, that don't see the benefit of this. When we talk about railroading this and we talk about their ability to get this through, Jim's just sort of advanced the point, which I was going to advance, is well, who is actually in favour for this? I was of the understanding that the South American powerhouses were absolutely against it. The Europeans are against it. So who is it that's going to hold the votes to be able to get them to a point where it can be railroaded through, if that is the right terminology?
Well, we're seeing support from parts of Asia, from Africa, even the French Federation. The developing countries, I
understand, but why do they have the votes over and above the Europeans and the South Americans?
Well, I mean, this is a very interesting thing about FIFA and its democratic process and how it's set up. The fact one member, one vote, all 211 associations have equal voting, which has obviously helped presidents over so many years.
But if it were to be a biennial World Cup, when were they suggesting that would start?
Well, again, limited detail on there. Obviously, 2028 would be the first potential date, but now UEFA have started the bidding process for the Euro 2028 just in the last couple of weeks, inviting expressions of interest. And if they were to have it in 2028, that would put it in direct conflict immediately with the Los Angeles Olympics. And
there you go.
There was an interesting statement last weekend, quite unprecedented in IOC terms, really speaking out against FIFA's plans. And the IOC saying their president, Thomas Bach, hasn't been properly consulted by Gianni Infantino. They're talking about the impacts on other sports because every tournament would feature a World Cup. It would monopolize a lot of the space other sports benefit from. And actually, also talking about impacts on player welfare, the fact so many more games. And also they believe it would damage the women's game as well, because growth. Because
sounds very well thought out then.
Exactly. We don't want Thomas Bach getting to his feet.
But we've got Arsene Wenger involved, so that means it must happen.
I remember going to an event that Thomas Bach spoke at. Rob, my goodness, he could put an aspirin to sleep. Well, I mean, we shall wait to see what happens, but at the moment, the IOC are against it. As you say, many managers are against it. The South Americans are against it. It's going to be a close run thing, but there's no way of telling if Wenger is going to win the day or not win the day.
Well, he's certainly got Gianni Infantino trying to get him to push through these plans. He's really trying to gather support. And it's all, it seems, about FIFA trying to get a greater say on the global game. They would see it as reconfiguring to the benefit of players, to give them more opportunities to go to tournaments more often, to be able to experience World Cups. But there's no guarantee, as someone like Wenger says, that just because you hold the World Cup more often, more countries will get the chance to qualify. And of course, from 2026, it is expanding to 48 teams from 32 now. But obviously, so many of these countries don't necessarily qualify. And what we're seeing in the bigger picture as well is the sense of FIFA wanting to, be ever more powerful. Gianni Infantino on his tours in the last couple of weeks has been pushing this idea of another Middle East World Cup with Israel potentially hosting with the UAE jointly. Many have often said that FIFA is often seeking the Nobel Peace Prize, and some of the statements can often seem like that when they talk about trying to bring countries together and how football can unite and heal. So trying to elevate the status of football in the game. But certainly this has really picked another fight between FIFA and UEFA, and it's created this hugely contentious point where you've got players against it, coaches against it, and even the other week, Thierry Henry pointing out why is so many ex-players being consulted? They're not the ones who are currently in the game at the moment, and we've not heard from necessarily many in the game at the moment. Courtois last week, obviously pointing out the ever number of increasing number of matches. And then mixed it all, one thing Arsene Wenger told national associations on a recent call was maybe there won't just be a World Cup with 48 teams, but a secondary World Cup for those that don't qualify.
Oh, for God's sake.